Hi, I am Tammy Marshall, and today I'm going to share with you the rest of chapter two of my thriller called Twinges. If you haven't yet seen heard me read you the first part of chapter two, you'll want to go back and listen to another video. And it's kind of a long chapter, so that's why I broke it down. So we left off where Jeremy, the shady kid in Miss Matthews' class, had finally come back to class. So I'm going to go from there. Again, this is chapter two in Twinges. Miss Matthews, look who came back at the end of music class, Simon yelled as he pulled Jeremy across the floor and then presented his friend in front of Nora as if he were a prize. The look of surprise that crossed Nora's face was so genuine that Simon veritably crowed as he zigzagged through the rows of desks toward his own at the front of the room. Nora quickly closed her gaping mouth and said with too much enthusiasm, Jeremy, we're so glad to see you again. Feeling better? She pasted a seemingly solicitous look on her face, but the boy gave her a quizzical look before nodding. I guess so, he replied as he plopped down into his desk chair. Nora stepped away to attend to the class and bring focus to the chaos caused by their weekly music class. The young music teacher enjoyed incorporating dance moves into the songs the children were learning, so the students always returned to their regular classrooms wound up and out of control. She clapped her hands a few times and called above the tumult. All right, settle down. Grab your science notebooks and a pencil and a ruler. We're going to work on the charts about average temperatures we started yesterday. The students groaned as usual, but they did as they were told and began to pull their supplies from their desks. Nora glanced at Jeremy and noticed that he was peering into the dark recess of his desk. She quickly shoved her hand in her pocket and pushed the collar down as far as it would go, but she feared the outlines of the metal fastener and tag would be visible through the light fabric of her slacks. So, with her hand still buried in her pocket, she casually walked to her desk and rummaged in a drawer. Keeping her left side turned away from the students, she withdrew her hand and swiftly deposited the collar behind her box of special prizes and stickers for students who did something noteworthy. She peeked at Jeremy as she closed the drawer. He was busy looking at the floor around his desk and didn't yet have his science notebook or pencil or even his ruler on his desk, while most of the other students were fully prepared and waiting for her to start the lesson. Attempting to act normal, she called across the room to Jeremy as she took her place at the board and politely reminded him to get out his work. The boy looked up and locked eyes with her. For the briefest of moments, Nora felt, or imagined she felt, a malevolence coming from Jeremy. But then he looked down at his desktop and nodded. Nora watched as Jeremy retrieved his notebook, the same one she'd been looking through only moments ago, along with a well-worn pencil, which lacked an eraser, and a 12-inch piece of stiff cardboard that Jeremy had fashioned into a ruler. When she'd first seen his homemade ruler, Nora had been a bit shocked, but also amazed at his craftiness. Now, seeing the drawing of the dead cat and finding the collar, Nora wondered if Jeremy was in fact crafty, but not in a good way. After school, Nora reported for her required bus duty. From her vantage spot at the top of the ramp leading from the front entrance to the sidewalk below, she kept one eye on each of the students boarding the 3 school buses that would carry them home, and one eye peeled for any sign of Jeremy. Since he wasn't a regular bus rider, Nora assumed he either lived near enough to walk home or he was among the throng of students gathering near the parent pickup lane. If the latter was the case, she didn't have a clear line of sight to the carpool lane because the buses were blocking much of it for the moment. As the stream of children exiting the building thinned, Nora gave up her search for him and turned her attention to getting the remaining children onto their buses. She walked down the ramp, nodding to the other 2 elementary teachers who had the after-school bus duty with her. One waved, but the other didn't notice her because he was helping a small girl pick up some papers she had dropped. Nora stopped just short of the bus's open doors and peered up at Gabe, the bus driver, with her standard questioning look. Knowing this expression well, Gabe scanned his clipboard and then reviewed his young passengers through his large rearview mirror. Miss Gracie, are you back there? He called, and a tiny voice yelled, Yes! Gabe hung his clipboard on a special plastic hook he'd mounted on the dash and winked at Nora. All present and accounted for, Miss Matthews. She smiled at him. Okay, Gabe, drive safely and enjoy your evening. The driver reached for the lever to close the open doors. You too, Miss Matthews. Stay safe out there. He pulled the door shut and shifted the large bus into gear. Nora stood looking after the bus as it slowly merged into the traffic, leaving the school's lot. There was a touch of a scowl visible on her face as she asked herself, why did Gabe say, stay safe? He'd never said that to her before in all the years she'd been paired with his bus. A hand fell on her shoulder and Nora jumped. Earth to Nora, Sally Pringles, one of the second grade teachers, said. Sally chuckled at Nora's startled reaction. Sorry, didn't mean to scare you, but you were really lost in space there. Was I? Nora shook her head as if to clear it. Thanks for bringing me back down to earth. She smiled weakly at her co-worker and friend as they headed inside. A sudden ruckus by the bike racks caught their attention. What in the world? Nora blurted as she realized Simon and Jeremy were pushing each other and yelling. She and Sally rushed across the front lawn. As they neared the duo, Nora heard Simon yell, I tell you, it wasn't me. Noticing the two teachers rapidly descending upon them, Jeremy quickly shouted, You're the only one I ever showed it to. Then he jumped on his bike and took off before the women could reach him. Sally yelled, Jeremy, you come back here. Jeremy looked back briefly before increasing the urgency of his pedaling. He turned the corner on the next block and was gone. Nora knelt on one knee and asked Simon, Are you all right? Simon twisted his mouth in an effort not to cry. Yeah, I'm fine. Sally looked him over and brushed a bit of dirt off the side of his pants. Are you sure? The nurse might still be here. She could take a look at you. Simon nodded and then stood looking down at the sidewalk. Nora put a hand under his chin and gently lifted his face. Once he made eye contact with her, she asked, What happened? Simon shrugged and averted his eyes. Over his shoulder, Nora and Sally exchanged a glance and came to a tacit agreement. Mrs. Pringles, will you go get the principal, please? We'll have to report this fight. Simon's expression reflected terror as he grabbed hold of Nora's wrist. No, please, Miss Matthews, don't tell Dr. Granger. Sally crossed her arms and peered down at him. Fighting is serious, Simon would have to report it. The scared boy made his plea to Nora, his teacher. Please, Miss Matthews, I didn't start it. I wasn't trying to fight. We weren't really fighting, just pushing. His grasp on her forearm tightened. I don't want to be expelled. Tears sprang from his eyes, and he suddenly began to cry hysterically. Nora gave her friend a look and gesture that said, I got this. So Sally moved off toward the building. Seeing the other teacher leave, Simon looked even more stricken, and he asked through his sobs, Is she going to tell Dr. Granger? Nora patted Simon's shoulder quickly. No, Simon, it's all right. Please stop crying. She led him to one of the benches that lined the sidewalk. Sit down here with me and calm down. Simon plopped down and wiped at his eyes and face with the bottom of his shirt. Nora sat beside him and took a long look around the area to see if they were alone. They were. Quietly, she said, Now tell me what happened. After a jagged, calming breath, Simon said, Jeremy says I stole something from him. Nora felt her face immediately turn red, but she attempted to keep her voice even and neutral. Oh, what was it? Simon exclaimed defensively. I didn't take it, Miss Matthews. I swear I didn't. She made a placating gesture. Okay, Simon. But what was it he said that you took? Her young student pouted. I'm not supposed to say. Simon kicked at a chunk of loose pavement near his foot. Nora reminded him, You can tell me, or we can go inside and find Dr. Granger. Seeing Simon's shoulders slump, Nora felt bad, for insisting, but she was pretty sure she knew what Jeremy had accused his friend of stealing. It was in her best interest at the moment to keep this situation between Simon and herself. So she added, I promise I won't tell Jeremy you told me. Simon peered up at her as if to gauge her sincerity. She returned his gaze unflinchingly. He kicked again, harder, at the loose chunk of pavement as he blurted, It's just some dumb cat collar anyway. I don't know why it's so important. Nora feigned surprise. A cat collar? Why would Jeremy have a cat collar at school? Simon shrugged. I don't know. Maybe it was going to be his show and tell. She experienced a sudden intake of breath at the implications of Jeremy sharing a mutilated dead cat's collar for show and tell before she remembered something. But Simon, you're the one who told me Jeremy didn't have anything to show. He shrugged again. I forgot about the dumb old collar. He showed it to me a long time ago. Said he kept it in the back of his desk for power. Her frown intensified. Power? What did he mean by that? Simon suddenly stood and looked around uneasily. I don't know, Miss Matthews. Can I please go? My mum will be wondering why I'm not home yet. She stood too. Of course, Simon. She watched him retrieve his small backpack from where he dropped it during the scuffle. As he started to walk away, she said, Don't worry, Simon. I won't tell anyone what you told me. He didn't acknowledge that he'd heard her, even though she was certain he had. Simon crossed the street, and as soon as he was out of sight around the corner, Nora turned and hurried into the school building. After she entered her classroom, she locked the door from the inside. Then she went to her desk and sat down. From there, she had an unobstructed view of the expanse of grass she'd just crossed. Nora pondered the now empty schoolyard for a bit, lost in thought. Then she shook her head to clear it and turned her attention to the item she'd hidden in her desk drawer. Turning the collar over and over in her hands, Nora wondered what to do with it. She couldn't put it back in Jeremy's desk. If she did that, Jeremy would certainly assume that Simon had lied to him and replaced the collar in an attempt to curry favor. The boys' friendship might already be irreparably damaged, but she felt that Jeremy would never forgive Simon if he really thought Simon had taken the collar. Additionally, if the collar reappeared in his desk and Jeremy believed Simon was innocent, then the only other person who knew about the collar must be the one who returned it, as well as the one who took it in the first place. If it reappeared, Simon would surely tell Jeremy, eventually, about his conversation with their teacher. She couldn't have her students thinking she was a thief, even if it had been unintentional thievery on her part. She knew the only reason she wasn't going to return the collar and simply forget about the whole thing was because of the highly charged twinges she'd experienced when she'd touched Jeremy. Adding Simon's mention of the word power to the horrible prophecy she'd heard for Jeremy, Nora felt it was crucial to keep the collar from Jeremy. She studied the address on the tag. Was it Jeremy's? Grabbing her large work bag, Nora dumped the collar into a side pocket and pulled her car keys from another one. No time like the present to find out. Come back later for chapter 3 when I get that one done. But otherwise, if you like what you've been hearing so far, please feel free to buy yourself a copy of Twinges. It is also available as an ebook if you prefer it that way. Thanks for being with me today.